like writing literature. You can you can you can model like relationships between concepts, and then you can construct artificial intelligence algorithms to write literature. And eventually, that stuff's gonna get powerful. Like you're gonna be able to come up with algorithms that like write the funniest like sitcoms ever, and be like friend bots or something. I don't know. um, Really, like some of those like artificial intelligence algorithms that will like kind of like augment like script writing or book novel writing or whatever. They'll just be like in place to like augment those things and like maybe like provide suggestions or like just like combinate through like different like possibilities and like string together like like a visual graph of like plot ideas or something. But like eventually you get to this point where it's like the apex of like modernization. So you got like modernization, which is kind of like a phenomenon caused by globalization, where like all the like you have these cultures that are like global, and they can like absorb into them like aspects of cultures from across the globe, and then eventually like you take that concept to its extreme, you end up with this like global culture that is composed of like you know an amalgamation of all cultural elements from the cultures that developed throughout human history, and some of those cultures are more represented, and some of those cultures are less represented. And hopefully we don't lose those cultures entirely. But it gets kind of like it's kind of depressing though, because like we create these like systems of like creating knowledge and creating information that like far outpace our own capacity to do so, and then like we end up with these you know it's just like we are like powerless to like compete. We as humans are powerless to compete with like super intelligence and like even generating like art. And you could always say that there's like some like mysterious like there's some like mystery that the human mind is able to be to develop a connection with that artificial intelligence will never be able to touch. But I mean, like, how does that leave us feeling when like like artificial intelligence starts like writing like you know anime and manga and starts writing sitcoms and starts like writing movies and starts like providing all this content, and then in addition to like taking all our jobs, like how does that make us feel? Um, it's kind of depressing. Like once we get to that like apex of like modernization, where like everything that is everything that has been done a million times, and like there are really no novel variations of like art or culture that we can continue to create that would outpace the development of like artificial intelligence. So like, what do we do? um, anyway, and so anyway, so great people learn how to like. So my point by going on a tangent was that like if you try to say that like communication or like writing or whatever is just a liberal art, it's like just this thing that can't be quantified in any kind of like mathematic sense or whatever, you're kind of wrong. Like there's a lot of math in language and in writing and in art. And like the artistic mind is actually like more in touch with some like mathematic concepts than some people who have like master's degrees in math. Just because like, and that's why we should continue to study liberal arts in school, is that like this kind of, and I wrote an article about this category theory, something, something, something. Oh, I don't know if that counts as, that's ASCII. That doesn't count. I hope it doesn't count. My account's gonna get flagged. Anyway, I wrote this like article about like category theory and epistemology, and it talks about like how we can kind of train our minds to be like more capable of handling, you know, more capable of like learning like the things that we need for science and for STEM by focusing on art like at an early age, like by focusing on art and by focusing on like just by focusing on art and stuff at an early age, we'll develop the knowledge that we need to, or we'll kind of like craft our mind into one that is like more capable of dealing with STEM and more capable of like being trained in STEM. So it's very important that we don't completely give up things like art, even though like a focus on STEM is very important. Here's the article, by the way. So just like my thesis is just kind of that category theory helps you like model anything. It's like it helps you like model like anything that you can think of. It's like one of the it provides like tools that are like invaluable for cognition and metacognition, and that it like kind of like forms a basis for like a view on epistemology. So I kind of go through just like an example of like what I'm talking about in general in the first part. Some of the stuff is pretty interesting, I think, anyways. And then part two, which is more of like a discussion on like how our mind is like a collection of interconnected faculties, including like sensory data, intermediate pre-processing from like sensory data, not intermediate but immediate, and then you start like combinating all this data that's like streaming in from the senses along with the data that's kind of like arising from the consciousness that's like coordinating all this stuff. And then you got like, phonological and visual loop where you can like, even if you don't store something in your visual or auditory like memory, like even if something doesn't make it in your working memory or audio memory, then you can sort of like access this like temporary like phonological loop or visual loop. You also have like spatial awareness and stuff. It's called like proprioception. Let's see, proprioception, and proprioception is like it's basically like your it's just basically how your body makes sense of its overall body position, movement, and acceleration, and so you got that. It's basically spatial awareness, and there's lots of like when you combine sensory data in a certain way, there's a lot of like algorithmic shortcuts that are available to you. And like one of like the best explanations of this is to see how you can watch like Bruce Lee like light matches with nunchucks. It's pretty cool. And so basically, you just like see that like Bruce Lee is just like incredibly aware of like how he's like incredibly aware of like where he is in terms of like where his like body is in terms of his environment, and like how his body and how his actions relate to the environment that he's in, like physically anyways. And so it's just like this like superhuman like spatial awareness or superhuman like proprioception or whatever. And you got like muscle memory, which are like usually I think contained within the cerebellum and the basal ganglia. It's like just kind of like pre-recorded or like conditioned like movements within your brain. So like as you like perform a certain action over and over and over again, then you like start training this stuff in your basal ganglia and your cerebellum, and like even into like it even extends into your like nerves and into your like they call it muscle memory because it's like as close to your muscles as possible. And there's these like routines that your like body can like after they've been conditioned, your body can just like execute really fast. And then you got like short-term memory, working memory, long-term memory, blah blah blah. I'm really not trying to spend too much time on this. You got these like procedures, and then you got like focus and attention. You develop this like uh, you got like the subconscious and conscious, and then you got this like choreography of like mental faculties, and then you've got like cognition, and you got metacognition, and these are like really important. And anyway, so by learning a lot about category theory, you can learn to model anything so that it is all interrelated. And if it's all interrelated, then you can like literally like program your own brain in a most efficient manner. And then you can like focus on developing cognition, and then you can focus on developing metacognition. If you can like really develop these two right here, cognition and metacognition, to like especially metacognition. Then you can just like become like super intelligent, especially metacognition. But metacognition is really difficult to develop, especially like if you there's like this ironic like it's kind of like this like ironic truth about intelligence, which is that like if you don't have to struggle very hard to learn what you learn, then you tend to like max out on what you can learn because you didn't have to struggle very hard to get there. So if all you do is go to college and you study one thing and you don't study very many different subjects in any detail, then you'll learn that one thing very well, or you'll learn your one major or your one like hobby or your one skill very well, but you won't really be able to expand out beyond that. Um, and you won't really obtain like the same level of like metacognition as like some other people. And I found that like I was able to like learn a lot by just or one of the reasons like I became very intelligent in spite of like a deficit to working memory and short-term memory. Um, Partially because like I had to struggle so hard to like think about problems like philosophical problems and computer science problems and stuff on my own, and then that forced me to like really think like really hard, and I really beat my head against the wall like in my early 20s, like trying to like understand something like category theory without being able to like ask somebody what that was. And so that caused me to like I modeled different problems like over and over again. I modeled them, I remodeled them, like I've thought about like different ways of solving the same problem, but nothing really gave me the answer that I wanted. And then eventually, like I sort of discovered category theory and stuff like that. But that whole process helped me develop cognition and metacognition. And in spite of my short-term memory deficits and in spite of my working memory deficits, I'm actually very intelligent. And even though if I took like a IQ test, like apparently my IQ is like 129. Like, are you serious? That can't even be true. But I mean, I just don't have a very good short-term memory, so it's very hard for me to like get anything done. As you can see, like I've like ran from like one segment to another, or one topic to another topic to another topic. I'm trying to like tie myself back to what I was actually originally talking about. But I mean, if you try to say my IQ is 129, like that's crazy. I actually don't want to brag about my IQ. Even if my IQ is 129, I mean that's okay. Like, wouldn't it be amazing if everyone who had a 129 IQ was as smart as like as I was or whatever? Even though I'm really not that smart, like there's a lot of things that I talk about that I know in some like basic like initiative to some kind of like initial degree. Like there's a lot of subjects that I know just a little bit about, or I know about them without actually having my knowledge tested, or without having like maintained like my level of knowledge. And so I'll talk about a lot of these subjects, and then like I get a lot of the stuff wrong. So I mean, which is kind of frustrating. I wish I knew a lot of, I wish I knew a lot of things like in more detail. But then so part 3 of this series is just talks about like strengthening specific mental faculties through learning. So it goes through like different activities, and then just in general, without any kind of like without referring to sourced like without referring to source like studies or anything. I just basically cover like different activities, and I try to describe like how that activity would increase your proficiency in some specific specific mental faculties. So like for and this is probably the best article. Like, if you're going to read any article out of those three, it's probably this one. This is the one that you should read. This is also another interesting article, which is Language Theory for Autism and Traumatic Brain Injury. Which talked about like using languages to sort of like repair the brain, since language is like a function of, it's like kind of like a high level function of the brain that interacts with so many parts of the brain. Then if you can trigger yourself, if you can try to like relearn a language, then like because it interfaces with so many parts of the brain, you may be able to like trigger like rewiring the brain more proficiently and more like completely than you would with like other, it's like it might be a good thing to try for people who have like had traumatic brain injury or who have like autism or something like that, because it might allow you to like rewire. You might be able to like more easily rewire your brain. Anyway, I've written a lot of like really good articles, and I get almost no feedback on them. It's like, it's whatever. I don't really care. I'm like not writing for anyone else. I'm writing for myself. That's why I write with a really shitty like informal style, because I just feel like I have all these like amazing ideas, but then I don't ever like really get to like put them out there for whatever reason. And I feel like there's this like hilarious saying that I remember someone saying to me a long time ago, which is weird because I don't actually. Oh, let's see. What is it? So I remember somebody saying it to me. I have a celebrity crush on someone else. Don't tell anybody. It's kind of embarrassing. Anyway, so where is it? Oh, here it is. Yeah. Anyway, so I was like talking to somebody a long time ago. I can't remember who it was, but they said, there's no point in being the richest man in the graveyard. And I think what they meant by this, and this person was actually quoting someone else, and what they meant was like, if you've got all these ideas and stuff, and you just talk about doing them, and you never actually do them, and then you just die and you never get to do anything about them, then it doesn't, they don't actually benefit anyone. So, if for some reason, like, I wasn't able to actually write any of these things down, like, that would be kind of a shame, because, like, I feel like, I find that a lot of the things I think about that I think are novel or creative are actually just, like, rehashing other things that other people have done. But there's actually, I have a lot of, like, original thoughts on things. But, so part 3 was just talking about, like, modeling different activities. So, like, programming is one of the most beneficial in terms of like expanding your cognition, because and it's also one of the few that require development of metacognition, and the degree to which you develop metacognition like can really like seriously expand your proficiency in programming. But it's programming seems rarely useful in and of itself, and blah blah blah, but basically it strengthens our ability to deconstruct or generalize large complicated problems into smaller problems, therefore embodies our ability to abstract processes into logical step-by-step procedures, and involves like very high-level mathematic concepts, although like most of those high-level mathematic concepts are obscured. Like you won't actually know what kind of like math you're working with in object-oriented programming or functional programming until you've actually got like 10 years of like programming under your belt, and then like maybe you're taking like master's level like math or computer science classes, and then you'll like understand like, oh, like all that stuff I was doing was actually like really complicated like math. And so and mostly the cognitive functions that programming improves are cognition itself and metacognition, and also like if you have like a high level of working memory or short-term memory, that really helps. Like the more things that you can like hold in your head without using like a chart or whatever to visualize those concepts, like the better. Although like if one of my biggest mistakes throughout like my entire like throughout the entire decade of my 20s was to like, one of my biggest mistakes was to not use diagrams, and was to not use pictures to model things. Like I can't believe how much time I've wasted by like flipping from file to file just because like I didn't like design something up front. It was like so frustrating. And one thing I wish I could learn is UML, just because it will increase my proficiency. And chess is really good because thinking more than 3 or 4 moves ahead in chess requires extensive short-term memory and pattern recognition. And in order for the human mind to be able to deal with like the complex amount of information that a chess game like embodies, you have to be able to recognize the similarity between like various like chessboard positions, and like the similarity of like strategies and the similarity of tactics, and you have to be able to generalize this like complicated stuff, and like because it is like impossible to consciously like evaluate every single like move, because it just requires like simultaneous like examination of like way more information than the human mind is able to deal with at any one time. And that brings me to another tangential point, which is like there may be some like it may be that true artificial intelligence is neuromorphic, and it may be that true artificial intelligence would therefore also exhibit the same limitations of the human mind. So it may just be true that any kind of like true artificial intelligence has many similar limitations, and many similar like memory and processing limitations as like the human mind. So there may be like it may just be that any kind of like generalized artificial intelligence might have like a limit to how much information that it can like simultaneously process. But anyways, it may also be completely false. So yeah. So anyway, so you gotta like recognize patterns, and you gotta use like a lot of like short-term memory, and you really gotta like pay attention to how an opponent is implementing their strategy, and you gotta like you gotta use this like backward induction, which is like a really important like process to develop. Backward induction means like you're like, okay, my chess pieces are here, my opponent's chess pieces are there. I got to figure out how to get this bishop like in the front row, and I got to make sure he's safe and backed up, and I want to put pressure on his knight or whatever to like force it to move. But I got to do all that without like alerting my opponent to the fact that I want to get that bishop up there. So I got to like figure out a way to like do that. So I got to deconstruct all these moves so I can safely move it up there without like leaving it out to dry or whatever, or like having it in a weak position. And I also want to like do all that without like losing my advantage of like coverage in the center of the board. And like you gotta like, and another backwards induction problem is like identifying possible checkmate scenarios and move sequences that allow you to reach them. So you gotta like visualize this place where you want to be, and you gotta figure out how you're gonna get there. Painting is another place where you have like this kind of like backward induction, but it's a very visual backward induction. And painting and like art, and especially visual art, since we live in such a visual world, is like a very awesome like place to be in, or it's a very awesome skill a very important skill to develop, because yeah, if you can develop this kind of like backwards induction for painting, then you can learn how to like design a complicated product, and learn how to like deconstruct like this sequence of things that you need to do to like build that product. Another good example is like cosplay. Like cosplay, you got like, okay, like that's my favorite character, like or that's the the popular character from that anime that's getting ready to come out or just came out or whatever, and like that's what their costume looks like, and so that's your end goal. Like, so okay, you got like a picture, maybe a couple pictures of this character, and you're thinking like, okay, I've got this body shape, and I've got like this fabric, and that fabric is like too expensive, but I can use this other stuff, and I can like deconstruct like all like the list of things that I need to like buy, the amount of fabric or whatever that I need to buy, like the kind of thread, the kind of like tools I need to use to make that, and like you kind of like deconstruct all these things, and then like create this design. So you're not only designing the end product to match the picture, but you're also designing the process that you're going to use. And so like cosplay and painting and art, they're like great ways for people to like understand, and it's like enjoyable and fun to like develop these skills that I really think aren't really taught in school. Like school teaches like like public education. I mean, it's good, like but there's a lot of things that are kind of left out, and maybe public education is the right place for those things to be taught. But like if there aren't like art budgets, and if people don't get to like explore, um, they're gonna miss out on some of these benefits, because like by exploring the arts, it seems like maybe we're just painting pictures, maybe we're just like making like maybe we're just making stuff that's gonna hang on mom's fridge for a couple months before it gets thrown away, or maybe we're just like maybe we won't pursue art as a career because it doesn't make any money. But maybe these arts like equip our minds with like the tools that we need to like work with work with science and stuff like that in the future, and to work with STEM in the future. And I think it does, because I mean, really, to like be proficient in art, you've got to examine all these different possibilities. You've got to be really in tune with your subconscious mind, and you've got to kind of like evaluate all these things, and those are like you're like developing like subconscious processes that actually resemble like the math that is required to learn to like the math that's required for programming and for STEM. So like you're developing these things like subconsciously, and I actually believe that if you develop a skill like that the mind is like composed of these interconnected like behaviors, and that if you consciously develop this one skill for like math, that you create this like subconscious like tool that your brain can reuse in other places. And so that by like consciously learning these things, or by subconsciously learning them, that like your brain can kind of like recombine these behaviors simply because they're similar. And anyway, the point that I'm trying to emphasize is that there's so many reasons why art is like just as important as like STEM. And really, I guess the problem is like we just need our kids to learn like a dozen times as much stuff before they get out of like high school. And we just really need, there's like so much more stuff that we need to get them to learn. And I think the best way to do that is through like kind of a dirty word, but like social engineering. And social engineering is really like the best way to, because you got to figure out like, because if you're trying to like force someone to do something, it doesn't matter like how much you try to like, it doesn't matter how you force them to do it or how hard you try to force them to do it. If they don't want to do it, they're not going to do it. So if you find some way to like convince kids that education is really the way to go, and they should always try as hard as they can, even from like elementary school on up, then they're gonna by the time they get to middle school and high school, hopefully there should be like a greater proportion of kids that have the right attitude. And I think the kids that have the wrong attitude, I think they should kind of be like pulled out, and kind of not like pulled out completely, but like kind of, and it's kind of messed up. But I mean, you want like the kids that are gonna really try hard to like not have any distractions, and then you want to like be able to deal with the kids that don't really care in another way. But then again, like, can you really like, is there any kind of like system that you can put in place that like fairly does that, or are there any kind of like processes that can do that without like creating other situations, without creating more problems? And that's where that's where like the social engineering stuff sort of breaks down. And like, but really like magnet schools are like a wonderful thing. I mean, I think they're like for the kids that truly do excel, like you need to get like all of the other distractions out of the way. Even though it's also important for like talented kids to have like just a normal life too. I mean, that's important, but I don't know. There's like not a lot of good answers to that. And then also like as someone who feels like they've been isolated, I mean it really sucks. So I mean, as like I've been there, it sucks. Um, so, but I mean, I think like I just feel like America was like demoralized in like in the just like over the past 50 years, really. Like we've just been like demoralized, and a lot of it's just been ourselves, like through like our own like through our own culture. Like we have like just like we have like sapped our own will to like do anything great. And I don't really know how to fix it, but and the problem is like once the economy changes to one where there's like once the economy changes to one where there's like just my eye twitches. I don't really know why. I know what it's called. It's like myokinesia or something. It just like twitches. I have no idea why. But once our society changes to one where there's like uh, automation everywhere, and like technology is just kind of like artificial intelligence is like building technology itself, and like we don't really need to learn that stuff anymore, then it's gonna be really hard to maintain that like to maintain a workforce that is like willing and able to like work with technology, like if they don't have to, like it would be really hard to like maintain like a workforce full of people that can deal with like problems that might present themselves with artificial intelligence, especially if it becomes like really easy for us to be lazy when artificial intelligence and automation starts like taking over our opportunity, or it starts taking over all the things that we do for work. Because then I mean, and so like our economy is just changing. It's really going in a direction that I wish it weren't going towards. Like it's going like our economy and our world just in general is it's moving towards a world where there like is no privacy. There's no hope for privacy, and really just like everything you do is just completely public, and that kind of sucks. And it's moving towards one where you don't really have to like you don't really have to do much to like to live, like, and it's not like that entirely today, but in like 20 years, like I just don't see there's gonna be so much automation everywhere, and the economy is just gonna be so radically transformed that like I don't see how you would I don't see how I don't see what's gonna like maintain people's motivation to like learn and work really hard, and that's really important. Is that we like figure out some way to like make sure that people just continue working really hard, even though they might not have to. I mean, and that's not to say that we don't have to work hard in 20 years. I'm just saying like in 20 years it's gonna be a lot easier for people to just be lazy and I don't know. Simply because like if robots are doing everything, we don't have like major problems with like energy. Like let's say we clean up the environment in 30 years. So we're talking like 2040, 2045. We've cleaned up the environment. We've automated everything. There's no energy problems. We like constructed like an array of like solar cells like that like partially obscures the sun, and it provides us with all the energy we need. Um, what then? Because there's no need for people to work. So why are people going to want to work? Should people need to work? Should people need to improve themselves, or should they like? And what's the meaning of anything at that point? Like if everything can be obtained without like any hard work, and if people can just basically live out like whatever fantasy they want, in VR or AR or whatever, you know, what kind of society are we gonna have? Are we gonna have like a society that's like similar to the one in Clockwork Orange? Because I certainly hope not. And I think that we are, I don't know, I think we're moving towards, like, we need to like think really hard about how things are going to change, because like once they've changed, it's going to be, you know, it's going to be too late. Like as we're progressing towards that, we can choose the direction in which we arrive at that like final inevitable point. We can like choose our path towards it, but then once we're there, like especially if people don't have to like work very hard or don't feel compelled to work, then like how do you move away? How would you move society away from a place like that if nobody has to do anything? Anyway, point is liberal arts, good way for people to learn how to use their brain, and music's another great cognition expanding activity. It's very important to study, start early and study theory. This like helps them develop like a mind body kind of thing. You kind of like gotta like learn how to like, if you're gonna learn to play clarinet, you gotta like coordinate all these like muscle move, or gotta coordinate the motions of your digits. Then you gotta if you're learning like how to play piano, you gotta like learn this kind of like spatial relationship. You gotta like builds these different like pieces in your brain. You gotta like learn about rhythm, and you gotta learn about like uh, reading music and thinking, and like if you do like sight reading, you've got to like learn how to like read ahead and like acquire a chunk of like sight reading information about what you're going to play, and then like hold that in your brain long enough to play it, and like you got to like kind of like abstract like the amount of like information that you have queued up, uh, and then you got to like execute that, and as you're executing it, you're gonna like look for more information, like, and then you're gonna like execute that bit of the music, and then you're gonna look for more information. So you gotta like kind of like abstract, your thought process. And I can't really sight read. I've always been a little bit jealous of people who can, but I just can't. Like, I can play music that I memorize very well. I can also improvise, and I'm okay, but it's kind of like weird, the stuff that I play on piano on improv. But and then so uh, and that's just all like skills that you gotta like equip your mind with if you want to play music on your own. But then also like playing music as a group is like incredibly like useful. You gotta like learn how to like stay in time with the other people in your group. You gotta like learn how to like coordinate with those people to learn the music, and that's also very very useful. Playing the drum set, I feel like, is unique among instruments for its ability to improve like rhythmic coordination, and you kind of like dissociate from like conscious control over each limb, and you gotta like coordinate like instead of like just like coordinating like your digits on like two limbs or whatever, or like coordinating the motion of your arms. Kind of gotta like coordinate like the motion of all your. You gotta like coordinate these different like rhythms across like all four limbs, and it can be pretty tough. And writing is another good one. Writers really gotta understand like psychology and or yeah. And the best writers can do this in such a way that it allows readers to explore like hidden ideas that kind of inspire to work. So like best writers like present something in their works, but there's like something like, and the readers only get like the stuff that's been presented to them on the surface. But then there's like all this stuff like below the surface. And the best writers or the best artists or the best the best like directors or whatever, they like present the stuff on the surface and then allow people to like kind of like explore that on their own. So they might like present like various arguments to support or detract from a philosophy on the surface, and then they like let the reader or the viewer kind of like explore that on their own. Yeah. And really you gotta like I don't know. There's all the point is there's all this stuff like tricky and parkour, breakdancing, freestyle rapping. Freestyle rapping is a really good one if you want to like train people to be like be able to think on their feet, like rhetorically, like to be like good speakers or to be like really in touch with language. Freestyle rapping is actually a really good way to do that. And um, this is one that I've been thinking about doing just to like learn how to like, use language, like to be more proficient with language on my feet. It's something that I wish I did when I was younger, not because I would want to be like a rapper, but just because like I would like to have that kind of skill, and I feel like if I had learned how to do that, I would be a lot better at that. And then of course there's breakdancing, something that I did, and I really feel like this is like a really good, um, it's like pretty pivotal in like getting me in touch with my body and getting me in touch with like the process for like improving my body and improving my mind, and like kind of like figuring out like because I didn't have anybody like now like there's so many like little kids like they're like 11 years old and they're just like crushing it with like like pop locking or whatever, and like or they're just doing like it's like a 7-year old doing like 1.5 air flares, and then they like hit like this head spin that's ridiculous, and they get back into air flares. I'm thinking like this kid is like 7 years old. What are they like putting in his like Cheerios? And and really like when I started learning to breakdance, it was like 2004, 2005, 2006, and there's just like YouTube wasn't really a thing yet. So I had to go like read these guides and forums to like learn how to do a windmill, and I didn't have anyone to show me how to do a windmill. I practiced for like 4 months until I met someone else that could do one, and I couldn't like I had to like teach myself how to break down videos, and like teach myself how to like observe, like slow down these videos. You couldn't just like change the speed of playback on YouTube. You had to like go like, and still like things were easier than they were 20 years before that, but I had to get really creative in learning how to do that stuff, and I didn't have a mirror. I never had a mirror to practice with. I had this one mirror, but it wasn't really, doesn't really count. If I had a mirror when I was like first learning, I would have gotten a lot better, a lot faster, which is really frustrating. But anyways, my point is like kind of like lost the point. Anyway, it was a lot harder to like learn how to do breakdancing and learn how to do that kind of stuff. Now it's all over YouTube. You got plenty of examples of how to do it, and people can easily like embrace all these subcultures. It's really awesome. And I guess as people like need to work less and less, maybe we'll focus more on art. But I actually don't think that'll really, I don't really think that'll happen. So there's tricking parkour, yoga develops mind-body awareness. Acting is another great one, especially improv. And so there's this one thing that's just pretty much always true for artificial intelligence, and that is that proficiently trained neural networks can interpret and classify content, but they can also be inverted to produce content. And it's like clearly demonstrated in the art's ability to develop like a particular kind of creative vision. So if you're a painter, like you can learn to like ideate things that you might paint like more clearly, and that's why learning how to paint or learning how to produce visual art would be great for like preparing someone's like mind while they're in middle school or high school to be ready for like STEM in college, where they might be like working with CAD or working with like some other kind of like STEM design. And for acting, like people who like act different, people who act out different like scenarios and stuff like that, learn how to like read people very well. Like actors can always recognize like a good actor, and sometimes they get really pissed off if you manage to out act them, or I don't know. So that doesn't sound very good. But proficiently, yeah. But my point is that the more kinds of art stuff that you learn, you kind of like train these like neural networks in your brain. You train these like kinds of like functionalities or functions in your brain, and then you can kind of like invert those functions. So a good painter would become like a good person for like design, like producing visual designs, or like a good, freestyle rapper would become like a person who has great oratory skills. A person who is good at improv is like very good at like interacting with other people. A good chess player is very good at like kind of like inverting those neural networks, and like they're really good at like backwards induction and stuff. And so skateboarding is one that is really good because you have to develop like this kind of like spatial awareness, but it kind of like requires this acute understanding of how to manipulate an object as though we're like an extension of your body. So you're like becoming more in tune with your body, but then you're also becoming in tune with this thing that your body is manipulating, and like you kind of like develop these like extremely quick reflexes, and you develop muscle memory and balance. You might also like break your ankle. So yeah, and you kind of need this like dynamic. You need this kind of like dynamic muscle memory, which is like completely detached. So you can't just like execute these like completely static muscle memory routines to like perform a kickflip, because as you're doing a kickflip or as you're doing like a different like a trick like a dolphin or something, you gotta like read like the state of the board. Like your muscle memory or your cerebellum or whatever is like getting feedback from like from your feet and from like the vibrations and everything, and from your like spatial awareness to like understand how to like execute the rest of the move so that you land within like within a specific like functional like threshold. Um, so you gotta like you can't just like coordinate like a static muscle memory routine. You gotta like develop these like muscle memory routines that like allow for like parameterized variation. And so skateboarding is a really good way to kind of like develop like that kind of spatial awareness and muscle memory. And like martial arts is another really good one. Martial arts is like fantastic. It requires like this kind of like the same kind of backwards induction and ideations of paths to reach a particular objective. But in contrast to chess, it's like much more crucial to be capable of like empathizing with your opponent in order to read their strategy. So, and the development of such strategy requires short-term memory. But you gotta like you kind of got to like every opponent fights differently. So you've got to like develop like an understanding of how that opponent is going to like fight, or how they're going to react to a specific move, or how they're going to react to a specific sequence of moves, or how you can control their attention so they react to a specific sequence of moves in a different way that allows you the opening that you need to actually make a strike safely without opening yourself up. So you have to like become it goes back to this thing of like we are all one, and you have to like know your enemy and know yourself, and you have to like approach the situation without like becoming emotionally attached in it, and you have to like be able to make actions and observe your opponent's reactions to like gauge their skill level or gauge different categories of reactions, and you have to like know the enemy and know yourself, and if you do, then you don't have to fear. If you know the enemy and you know yourself, you do not need to fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory you gained, you also suffer a defeat. If you know the enemy, if you know neither the enemy nor yourself, then you will succumb in every battle. And so really you got to like know how you would react to a specific move from an opponent, and the way you react might be different. The way you react to one person might be different than you would react to another. And it's really just like martial arts and sparring is like really one of the best things that you could do like early on to like develop like really good like behaviors, or really good to kind of like develop certain cognitive functions to any kind of like proficiency. And sparring is not, I mean, it involves a lot of strategy, but it's not a strictly turn-based game. It's much, more loosely defined than chess, and it requires this kind of like ineffable mental process to like reactively construct the physical application of strategy. And so you need to like be aware of how your actions are perceived by your opponent in order to like understand how your opponent is like constructing their perception of you. So again, it goes back to this like we are all one thing, where like they have a perception of you and you have a perception of them, and then like you have to like determine like their like you both have a perception of each other, and then you have to develop your perception of their perception of you. And so and vice versa, like ad infinitum or ad infinitum or whatever. And so you have to do this in real time, like, and then you also have to like kind of it's like this like reactive development of a particular like kind of strategy and tactics, like the goal of which is to be incapable of being completely understood by your opponent. So the point is to like completely understand your opponent and to completely understand how your opponent understands you, while preventing your opponent from understanding you or from understanding how you understand them, and vice versa ad infinitum. So you have to kind of like develop this stuff in real time, and a lot of it's mostly subconscious. Nobody's thinking like nobody gets in a fight and they're thinking like you're not going to see like Bruce Lee in a fight and he's like, oh, like how does this guy think of my hair? Like how's this guy thinking about like my moves or whatever, or like how am I thinking about him? How is he thinking about how I'm thinking about him? Like people aren't really going to like consciously think of that, but like that's like the strategy. And so like you got to like condition yourself to be able to like construct those kinds of strategies in real time, and to kind of like understand like the the sphere of like options that are available to you at any time, and how that sphere of options changes, over time in different like positions with your opponent. And you have to it's less of a sphere and more of like a graph of like actions that you can take, but it's not quite a graph because there is like a spatial and temporal component to that. So it's kind of like a combination of a graph and like something like a sphere. um, and there's like it's both real time and turn based because like there's a rhythm to it. And but then again, there like each move that you take has a specific like amount of time that it requires to execute. But again, like the goal is to be like completely or to be incapable of being completely understood by your opponent, and the strategy for which counter tactics cannot be predicted or defined or understood. Um, that strategy cannot be like strategically or that strategy cannot be unraveled really. And there's like a little bit of like paradoxical math. Like, how do you identify patterns which were specifically developed to be indefinable, or how do you develop or how do you develop or define patterns or strategies specifically to escape definition? And this goes back to the thing that I was talking about like 3 hours ago, as the Tao Te Ching so eloquently states. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The nameless is the origin of the heaven and earth, or the nameless is the origin of heaven and earth, and the named is the mother of myriad things. And so I keep going back to this one verse in the Tao Te Ching, but it's like literally the only thing I quote, and I should really study the rest of it because I'm sure there's lots of like valuable nuggets in there. In fact, I've quoted some of those nuggets as well. Um, there's like a lot of really, really good quotes from the Tao Te Ching, but and also martial arts is physical and requires muscle memory, and I kind of posit that I do posit I can't talk. Right, I posit that by entangling empathy and spatial awareness and strategy and muscle memory, that martial arts develops certain like orchestrations of cognitive functions that can be generalized in many other situations. And martial arts actually requires empathy because again, like you have your opponent, you got your opponent, and you gotta like understand like how you perceive your opponent and how you perceive how your opponent perceives you and how your opponent perceives you and how your opponent perceives how you perceive them. And that requires development of empathy, even if you are like uh, actually enemies or whatever. It develops empathy because you have to like understand them as though they are you. What would you do in that position? Or and you have to like, the only way to develop a sense of like your advantage over their advantage is by understanding the similarity of like the similarity of that position and the similarity of the juxtaposition of that position, which is why it requires empathy. Although I don't think you can really teach martial arts in school, I don't think that'll really work. which is a shame, by the way. It's very unfortunate, but it's just. And you got to like understand like what space is critical, and like generally like blocking the critical space around your face is pretty important. And by understanding how you're vulnerable, you can understand how your opponent would be vulnerable, and you got to like learn how to like assess your opponent's skills. Like there's a balance, and understand like what situations would cause them to be imbalanced, and then understand like how to like construct a sequence of moves to lead them to being imbalanced, and then when they become imbalanced, then they're vulnerable. And so, and also disrupting balance means that your opponent's space of applicable reactions becomes extremely limited, which is a concept in game theory. So like it goes back to like the sphere of kind of like a sphere or graph of available actions. And so like if they have as many actions available to them as possible, and if all those actions are if none of them are limited, then you haven't really constrained their progression through this like graph of available moves. But as you constrain their space of available options, then you can like more accurately predict their next move. And so like as you do that, you can like learn how they you learn how they react, and like you construct or you try to like figure out a way to get them into a dead end in that graph, where the graph is like a sequence of moves. Uh, and so if you can like figure out how to get them to navigate through that graph to a point where they end up in a dead end and they have no actions left, then they're probably at some kind of like disadvantage. I don't know. It's like over intellectualizing this, but anyway, so like martial arts with weapons is similar to like skateboarding, where you have to have spatial awareness generalized to an object, and then you kind of like generalize the same strategy for martial arts itself to how that strategy is functionally different for a specific kind of weapon or for pairs of weapons. So you kind of like generalize. Martial arts causes you to develop this like you have to develop all these skills, but it's like kind of like you're relearning these same skills under slightly different conditions. And so as you do that more and more, then you kind of like generalize that even more so, because I don't really know how to explain it. I just know that that's kind of true. Like so, like if you like, it's kind of like the Y Combinator. So like as you basically like or it's kind of like combination through like various things. So if you learn how to like execute a strategy where like both people are on equal footing, just for like regular martial arts, then you kind of like understand how that strategy is for that set of for that set of options. And then so if you learn how to, if you lock down, if you like relearn that skill for different conditions. So let's say you do it with like you do like kendo, and one person has a sword and one person doesn't. You kind of learn how to reapply that same approach to strategy for that situation. And let's say you do it again where both people have swords. Okay, well then you kind of like relearn that again. Let's say one person has like a set of nunchucks and the other person has like, say the other person has a sword, and then you do it again for a situation where both people have nunchucks. And so you're kind of like relearning the same like skill set for martial arts under slightly different variations. And so you like your mind begins to the human mind just constantly generalizes things. And so as you continue to learn the same thing under slightly different circumstances, you generalize it more and more and more and more until everything is basically the same. Anyway, languages are also great because it allows you to like learn how to like encode information in different ways, or like structure information in different ways, and allows you to learn more about different cultures, and you can like begin to understand how different cultures think of things, and it holistically coordinates the entire brain. So therefore, with respect to the mind, language could be considered its own kind of like dimension, where like you can almost like entirely represent the mind in a particular language, and then you can like represent the same mind in another language. And so as you learn, I'm trying to figure out how to explain that. So like you might learn like English, and you can represent everything that you know in English, and then you learn French, and you learn French really well, and you can like fluently speak it, and so then you can learn how to like create another map of the mind with all the concepts enumerated like with respect to the French like semantic network, and then you can learn it again, or you can do it again with Japanese, and then you can do it again with Chinese. And my point is, like, each one of these languages is like its own like mathematic dimension, in that like you can represent everything that you know in English, in French, in Japanese, in Chinese, and then eventually, like, your mind, like, again, it's always generalizing things, so it generalizes all of that, and then it creates this. It starts approaching the universal semantic network, which is just by like examining the similarities between different languages. And so by learning each additional language and learning the same thing over and over and over again in slightly different dimensions or slightly different pairings, then your mind becomes like more so capable of directly understanding the concept instead of understanding everything. Because like, I mean, I grew up with English. I didn't grow up bilingual. So I only, like, when I think in English for the most part. Sometimes I try to like think without using any kind of like thoughts that are like chained down to language. But my point is, by learning like 4 or 5 languages, your mind should approach some point where you can think about things outside of language entirely. And so it should be much more efficient when you get to that point. But because you don't have to go from like a semantic concept to linguistic representation to processing your thoughts to back to like linguistic representation back to like the other semantic connection. Instead, you should just be able to go from like the semantic representation and like the universal network directly link to other semantic representations in the universal network, and you don't have to like incur the disadvantage of like thinking about things in language. And that's really kind of like hypothetical. I don't really know if anyone. I know that like there's like people who can claim to do like math in their head without by like thinking of pictures. Like they'll like picture like a number, and then they'll be asked to like maybe it's like a 4-digit number, and they're asked to multiply it against another 4-digit number, or they're asked to divide it with like a 5-digit number and some decimal points or something like that. And like I've seen documentaries where these people just like apparently like think about these abstract or these like basic arithmetic expressions as like pictures, and so they start thinking about the numbers, and the numbers kind of like merge together, and then the answer like visually appears in their brain. And I've sort of thought about like ways of doing math in that like without like abstracting things to like actually have like digits and stuff, but I can't do that kind of stuff. But anyway, my point is like I feel like there's this way of like processing like arithmetic, information with the human brain that like makes that like if we understood it, it would make more sense than writing the stuff down and doing long division or like writing it out. And I think the same is true with like making statements with with languages. Like there should be some point where we're dealing with concepts directly instead of like abstracting them through language. But I mean, then it of course becomes really difficult to relate that to someone else. But yeah, and so there's like negative stuff like video games, and video games can actually be pretty beneficial. Like I like playing like Battlefield, like Star Wars Battlefield and stuff, and MMORPGs can like teach people about the value of like fulfilling a role in a group and like coordinating group behavior, and they can also be a huge waste of time. TV is pretty bad usually, but TV can like stimulate people to think, and it can stimulate people's imagination, and it can keep us informed, or it's easy to like almost treat TV like a drug. Like you just kind of like, for me it's like really easy to like just kind of like sedate myself and turn my brain off and not have to like think for like hours. And I feel like all of this kind of points to like the similarity of all things, and so many people are like trapped believing that they're incapable of learning quickly, so it's not really worthwhile And unfortunately, many people lack the mental modeling required to efficiently learn new things, which sucks. That's why, like, I feel like you know, category theory is important to learn, or at least it was for me, because it allowed me to basically understand that everything can be modeled with a universal framework, and the lack of like efficient and robust modeling for cognition and metacognition is like the one reason some people seem to learn to seem it's like the one reason some people seem to learn much faster while others barely keep up. That sentence is kind of messed up. But, I believe like early childhood experiences and early childhood like thought processes determine intelligence and cognitive functionality more so than genetics. So like if you're like forced to like examine certain like basic problems that just aren't even that complicated, like early on in childhood, and someone just like gives you the answer and you don't have to spend much time thinking about it, then that might lead you to have like less of a cognitive or that might lead you to have less cognitive proficiency. Whereas like if you're kind of like if someone spends like dozens of hours with you while you're like 2 or 3 years old, and they're really good at communicating with somebody that age, and they're able to like kind of like get that young child to like walk through thinking about certain problems in a very specific way, and they can like ensure that person is like thinking about that problem in a very specific way and exploring that like phenomena in a very specific way, then you can like encourage people to use their minds like very early on in such a way that really develops that cognitive functionality. And I feel like that's way more important than genetics, and that's why like family and early childhood care are crucial for development. Because like if our family members are always like completely like busy, and like children are just like left in front of like the TV, or left in in front of like a video game system, or like they don't really like they need interaction really, and if they don't have that for whatever reason, maybe it's because their parents don't have the opportunity or are not financially capable of doing that, then that's really like a disadvantage that like maybe we just consider that fair, that like their parents didn't have the money to do that, so that's just the way the world works. The problem is like, of course I don't agree with that, but the problem is like like that's not really good for everyone else either, because we need for everyone to like develop with to their fullest extent, because if they don't, that's going to cause like problems down the road. Like if someone has like limited understanding because their parents had limited opportunity, then that's going to lead to that person being in the same situation as their parents, and so their children are going to have limited opportunity because their parents are going to have limited understanding, and yada yada yada. So at some point, while I don't really agree with like big government spending and stuff like that, and while I believe that it's like I, I believe that it's important to reward the people who uh, were willing to pay the price for something that was not deemed necessary, just because like they felt like it was the right thing to do. I feel like it's important to reward that kind of person, or even though that doesn't really sound fair, but like I mean I don't know. I can't really like complete that argument without like talking about that for like 30 minutes. Anyway, my point is like one way or another, like we need to like change things so that people don't have problems that they don't need to deal with simply because like they didn't have the money at the time. And at the same time, I feel like we need to find like free market ways of doing that, and find like figure out how to do it without like giant like big government programs. But like I don't know. I mean, if we need to like utilize, you know, more efficiently utilize everyone in our country, in terms of their like mind power, for like towards like STEM and staying on top of STEM and stuff like that, then we need to like ensure that these people like as they get to like middle school or high school or college age, like we need to make sure that they all are capable of learning the skills required for those subjects for like those like STEM subjects that they're going to study. And so we need to make sure that like we don't like the rates of kids who are capable of learning STEM in high school isn't like artificially limited because of like limited opportunities in middle school or elementary school. Because we really just need like everything as someone is developing through the school system, like they're like constantly like learning new skills, just kind of like progressing and like increasing their skill set. But if they miss some of those opportunities and they have like a less expansive like understanding of the world, or they're missing certain like critical pieces to progress to STEM in college, or to like understand how to like take care of like scholarship opportunities at the end of high school, or like like then that's kind of like a real shame because that person went all the way through like the school system without like, and just because like something wasn't available, like because they missed out on something, in maybe like elementary school or middle school, like they won't have the same opportunity as like someone else like to pursue whatever career they want to pursue. So I feel like it's important to equip everyone with all the tools that they need. And I don't really know how to do that really. So education definitely needs to be changed. I mean, but we could always like, I don't know. If we want to like research like all the available opportunities so that we can construct like one best universal policy for everyone across the country through the Department of Education. But then as we do that, we decide like what the thing that people should learn, or like what the core curriculum should be for everyone. As we decide what that is at the federal level, then like we prevent any kind of experimentation that would like allow us to like explore. So I think it's important to like make some things like completely set at the federal level, but then still allow some exploration there. And I think I think the cost of education in general is just going to like plummet. It's probably going to go, I mean, the effectiveness of like educational tools and the cost of those educational tools will plummet, while like the money that we still spend on education will remain the same. And so hopefully we can like increase the proportion of teachers to students throughout like grade school and middle school and high school, and then hopefully college will the price and cost of college will go down similarly also, and I hope that over the next 10 years the price of college would like plummet by like 50%, and in the next 20 years it would go down by like 75 or 80%, just because like online tools are like much more efficient to learn with. Of course, they don't really replace the social experience of college in any way, but I would hope that would cause the price and cost of college to go down, and then I hope that resolves the student debt issue. Like by figuring out like creative ways of getting the price and cost of college to go down, then we can prevent like students that have to live with like 2 decades of like student debt and like God knows how much interest, because like that's not right. And I think though that I just don't think it's right to completely like make education free, because like and it's like really something that students are not going to understand. And this kind of goes back to like Plato, and like Plato believed that like the elder generation was the one that should have the say in any society, really. That if like the young generation had complete authority in society, that they would like make changes that would completely disrupt or completely destroy that society, or maybe not completely destroy, but like that would gradually weaken that society. And the reason is because there's like certain things that you're just not going to understand because you haven't had the experiences, and most people are not going to have those experiences until they're like 50 about 50 years old. Like there's some things that you're not going to understand until you have had kids, and until like your kids are getting ready to go to college, and until your kids are getting ready to go to college, you're not going to really understand like why, you know, you're not really going to understand why you would feel proud to have a kid that was willing to pay like $80,000 to go to college, or like why, like, maybe that's not the best way to explain that, but you're just not really gonna like you're not really gonna understand certain things and understand why it's important to like reward those who are willing to like make a large sacrifice, or those who are willing to like make, accept like the burden of a large cost of education. You're not really going to understand why it's important to, um, you know, why it's important to reward the people who are willing to take those kinds of risks, uh, more so than those who are not willing to take those kinds of risks. So if you've got someone who's like willing to take like any risk and like do anything that they can to get into college, um, if you're willing to reward that person a little bit more than you would for the person than you would reward the person who's not, in terms of like their future influence and their future position in society, like 20 years after they go to college. Like if you do that, if you give the people who are willing to take risks to do the right thing, if you give them the reward, if you give them the better posturing in society, like 20 years later, that's a stronger society, because you've got the people who are like, who realize how much money it would cost, and who realize like how expensive it was, but they still realized it was the right thing to do, and they didn't. They believe that the value of like, if you reward people who believe that the value of education vastly outweighs like greatly inflated price, and those people are rewarded with more influential positions in society, you're going to end up with a much, much, much stronger society than you would if everyone could just go to school for free. And that's kind of shitty, but that's like the reasoning. That's like the reasoning behind that. And a lot of people are not going to understand that. And really, the price of education is just like ridiculous, like so ridiculous, like it's so high. Like spending like $80,000 or $120,000 to go to school, like for some schools, I mean, I can kind of understand, but for some schools, I'm just thinking like, you can be paying that off for like 20 years. And for some schools that like if you want to pursue like a degree in anthropology from like Harvard, like you better be coming from a rich family or living in like Boston. Like, but anyway, so I mean, like the higher education really does need to be restructured, but at the same time, like I don't think that we should, completely make it I don't think we should make it completely free. I also don't think the companies or the businesses lending money should be like charging such exorbitant interest rates on education, since that is the right thing to do. And I think like, like basically like extorting students and like, committing the sin of usury, and like overtaxing students who are like making the right decision. I don't think that's right. But I mean, there are options. I mean, I think the community college for pretty much anyone that wants to go, I think that's kind of a great thing. Even though I mean, it's like I don't think it would be that expensive of a government program, but I mean, I think that's actually a really good thing, because like, hey, if like somebody wants to like explore higher education, if somebody's stuck in a dead end job wants to explore like higher education without really like having to like commit to it. Maybe they're like in a dead end job and they just want to get out of it, but they're like unsure of whether or not like community college, or they're unsure of whether or not they could like cope with the cost of that if they were to fail for some reason, or if they didn't stick with it or whatever. I mean, I think it's good to provide that opportunity there because like normally people can go to like a community college and then just like basically they go there for 2 years and then they get into a 4-year college at like a reduced rate that's like in state, and so you should be able to go. You should be able to complete that path like for like less than 10,000, or I guess for free through community college, and then for like less than like 20 or 30,000 through like a 4-year education. And maybe you are in a dead end job and you just kind of like screwed around in high school and didn't get into college, but then you like decide that that's really what you want to do and you want to take it seriously, and you like go back to community college at the age of like 24 or maybe 30 or something, and then you decide like that's really what you want to do and you really focus on it, and you like blaze through your classes where you like barely passed in high school or something, and then you're able to kind of escape like poverty. Maybe I really don't see how that. I see that the argument that the government shouldn't like pay for everything, but then at the same time, like if somebody wants to like if somebody's stuck in a dead end job, like wants that opportunity, like I don't want to, and they're gonna like take it seriously, like I don't want to tell them no. Anyway, so yeah, just kind of like going through different blogs I've written, just kind of like covering different things. Go back to this. So communication. How did I get on that tangent? Oh yeah, I was just saying like a lot of people think that communication might seem like a liberal art, but it's really like very mathematic and very easily modelable, and you can really like quantify and systematize anything, and so or systemize anything, and so the person who excels in communication is really going to be they're gonna be good at like both parsing the nuggets of gold from like information received, as well as like being proficient at crafting their own content to convey the intended message. And so crafting the right message for your business, brand, or project requires like skill or experience, skill and experience. And it's really a tough optimization problem. And it takes like a lot of pain to craft the right minimal message. And by minimalizing the message and minimalizing the content, its concepts are pure and they're pure, simple, easily understood, and easily recalled. And like Apple's advertisements are really good examples of this. And their user manuals, their developer documentation, they're kind of like ideal, or they're kind of like the ideology that fuels like the behavior and interactions of their developers. You can just tell like it's all driven by their like communication style, and they like to like minimalize things and provide like the tools that are necessary and not overcomplicate things by constantly like reinventing the wheel or making slight variations on the wheel. They just like to basically give you the wheel, like here's the one thing that you need, and then you like their developers will actually like if you're like recreating a library that's like just kind of makes a slight change to something they already provide, they'll actually admonish you a little bit and like try to convince you to not do that, because they don't want to like put a whole bunch of tools out there that basically do the same thing. They just want to like they really prefer you to like work with like the libraries that exist, and the reason is because they don't want to like they don't want everything to be so complicated. And when they construct like their like message to like train new developers or to like bring other developers up to speed, they want to just be able to tell everyone the same thing. And so like this like Apple tends to want to like minimalize the content and the message, and they don't want to have a lot of like distracting graphics or whatever. You can actually see this in their product design too. Like their products are almost designed like like the MacBook Pros look pretty much the same. Like sometimes they change the colors of like something. Like usually they'll change the colors of something just so like if you buy the new MacBook Pro, it's obvious that like you spent like $3,000 on a new laptop. So they changed something so the people that are in tune with their products know that something, you just got something, some new shiny piece of Apple gear. Um, I can pretty much just tell that like Apple as a company, from the top down is structured differently just by like observing the uniform style and goals of nearly 100% of their communication. And like kind of returning to the 19th century economy, it really amazes me to think back to previous centuries before the internet and phone systems, and I kind of find myself like pondering what it would be like to remain a step ahead of my competition at that time. And just tying this back into like communication. So like if you own like a furniture store, like one of my friends was talking about how his like grandparents owned a furniture store in Roanoke, like you probably spend an exorbitant amount of time checking prices and quality of products from wholesalers and manufacturers. You probably interact with the network of like manufacturers um, in the local region. And it's kind of like just interesting to think about like how, one of the things I kind of stress is like thinking timelessly. Um, yeah, put this on like an inspirational poster or something. Anyway, so like, thinking timelessly, like how are you gonna you basically like think of a problem and you think about like how people might think of that in like 10 years or 20 years or 500 years in the future, and then you can like it's often more useful to think about a problem and think about how other people would think about that same thing like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Maybe think about how like different cultures might have thought about that thing, and I think it's a very good general tool for like brainstorming, and sometimes you'll like arrive at a different answer just because you considered how you thought about it timelessly, or you thought about it like, I don't know, it's a good way of thinking about something in a different light. And so you might want to like build like a network of local manufacturers, if you own like a furniture store in the 19th century. And so but how much of your time would you spend doing that? Like how would you stay ahead of like your competitors? So if you're in touch with like local manufacturers, you might get slightly different prices than your competitors do for the same exact product. Like how do you like convince them to give you a better price? Like how do you know what prices that your competitors are getting? Like, and like because like anytime like in the 19th century, pretty much anytime you wanted to like communicate, you would actually have to like physically travel, or you use the postal system. But all the information like all that information and networking would be so much more expensive and so much more crucial, because if you do have that advantage, then you can make a lot more money. Um, and it's not just always about making money; it's really about providing value and deriving value and like being fair. Like you can't like be uh, you can't set fair prices if you don't have the right information either. And prices can be unfair for either like the vendor or the provider, either the vendor or the retailer or reseller. The prices can be unfair either way, and so like to maintain a fair system of pricing things, you definitely need to like under leverage your like network of connections. And it's just interesting to think about that. Like before the telephone, like how do people like would they like travel to like large cities and like look at products there, and like and everything was so much more like high stakes. Like you probably, of course, the economy was a little bit better. I mean, money tended to go a little bit further, but still, like, and the important thing there is to think about like the knowledge for being proficient in this regard was very valuable, and so like determining how you acquire that knowledge when you might not even know that that knowledge exists is also valuable. So like, how do you like, if you know there's a better way of doing something, how do you get somebody to tell you that better way of doing something, especially like when that gives them the advantage? And so with more expensive communication and slower communication, I think like that would have been a lot more challenging, like back in the day. And so, like, and how would you like determine like what is worth manufacturing locally and what's more profitable elsewhere? I'm actually thinking that the further and further back you go, the more you know worthwhile it would be to manufacture things locally. But that still requires a lot of communication. And if prices go up like you know 300 miles away, then you might think that could mean that you should also raise your prices. So if you're staying in touch with like people in your industry like further and further out, like you can kind of stay in tune with the industry trends, and maybe new manufacturing techniques and uh, and I guess like in the middle or in the early 19th century, in the middle 19th century, there was all railway was beginning to be the rail infrastructure of the United States was like really being pushed out. I guess more so towards the middle of the 19th century, but that would have opened up a lot of opportunities. But communication was still pretty much equally as slow. It might have made like postage a little bit cheaper, but and so it seems that like oh shit. It's just to me, it's like an interesting thing to think about, just because it's so different than things are today. Like now, if you own a furniture store, like you can just like log on to Amazon and see how cheap they're selling stuff, and maybe make it $5 more expensive because like that's what you have to do to compete, which kind of sucks, by the way. But and so what? So and I guess that's not true because like you can't really buy furniture online because the shipping cost is so it's usually so expensive. Like, I tried to buy stuff online from IKEA once, and it turned out that they don't even like sell anything. They will like ship it to you, but I think you still have to buy it from the store or something. But then like the shipping cost is like more expensive than the item itself, and it's like I thought they had like efficient packaging, like just so they could sell it online, but I guess not. And it seems that like the advent before the advent of instantaneous communication, the business and especially retail, manufacturing, and distribution was all in like who you knew and how you could leverage your social network in order to maximize its benefits. That was kind of at a time when doing so was expensive in terms of time and energy because of the increased difficulty. The ability to do so would be very profitable, um, and you have to spend a lot more time thinking about how you were going to communicate with people and how you were going to like make the most out of like a social interaction. Whereas today, like if you forgot to mention something to someone, you can just send them an email, and that has a huge effect on like how we interact socially. And I think it's important to like I still have AOL Internet message logs from like the late 90s and the early 2000s, and it's like interesting to go back through those and see how differently people interacted then, like and how they reacted to different how they reacted to me, and how they seemed like everybody at that point was like so excited to be able to talk to other people like through instant messages and through like and I remember getting like my hip top, which was like the Sidekick, the T-Mobile Sidekick. I was a senior in high school, and I was like on AIM, like no matter like AOL Instant Messenger, no matter where I was. And I just remember thinking like how awesome it was to be able to like instant message. Like I didn't have to be in front of my computer to like instant message people. And there's like equally complicated problems, I guess, now for communication. Like there's like this like the internet is dominating information distributions, and algorithms kind of determine like what is visible to a certain set of people and what is not. And a lot of times you have to pay for access. So like if you really want to ensure that someone sees a message on Twitter, like you can promote it to a category of user or two categories of users that are similar to the user that you want to target. So you can like pay a bunch of money and like ensure that someone sees a tweet or whatever. I don't know if that's really worth it, but my point is like there's kind of like this paid access to distribute information to people in a targeted manner. AKA advertising in general. And so it really like there's so much information out there, you gotta like sift through all of it. And now the like informational advantage is available to those who can process the data, whereas like acquiring information used to be like the barrier to like or acquiring information used to be the barrier to overcome that signified opportunity. Acquiring and transmitting. Whereas acquiring and transmitting information used to be the barrier to overcome that signified opportunity, it is now the capacity for sifting through data to find valuable information. And so the prevalence of social media represents like innumerable opportunities to network with your customers and to learn from them and to understand how they think about your products and to observe the kinds of experiences your products create. But social media also presents itself as a huge vulnerability to business strategy. If you're not watching your message, you could be revealing a lot of information about your business strategy. About that business strategy. You could be projecting the wrong message or associations for your brand. Or you could be confusing your customer's perception of your brand identity, diluting your brand, or or unintentionally diluting your brand's value. Branding is like so important with branding is one of the most crucial aspects to I don't really know how to like emphasize that enough. Really, because I mean, like, the brand is like everything, and a lot of times there's products that are like just pretty much equivalent, like, and investors could like look at like 10 products that are like the next Twitter, maybe it's like Twitter for DR or something, and like if you got like 400, $500 million in like a VC fund, you might just like go out on the market and like go on producthunt.com and be like, okay, these 10 guys are pretty much the same. We like these teams. Like nobody's gonna pick the brand just because they like the word these people used. But they might say like we've got a dozen of these products that look almost exactly the same. Like we like these three teams. Out of these three teams, like these guys picked like the coolest brand name. Like I really like how simple it is. It seems marketable. It's pretty much the same as these other two teams that we also really like. But I think we're going to go with these guys because they have the brand that can like, they have like the right brand name, the right product structure, and the right, really they've cultivated the right identity to last like, a decade. And my point is like branding is really one of the most important aspects there. And moving back towards the facets of the great people like me, I like, enjoy watching like interviews with founders and other like great leaders today. I really don't like using the word. I don't like the connotations of like great leader. Like start thinking about like the wrong thing. And so I really like watching new and unknown founders working on like exciting products and projects. You might not have as much experience, but I like to do it because I see myself in their shoes. Like these guys are green, they haven't had the PR training. So what kinds of mistakes do they make? What do they consciously and unconsciously focus on presenting to the audience and why? What do they think is important about their product or their message, and how do they react to pressure when they're on stage? How do they react to like pressure when they get asked like the wrong question, or like when they're dealing with like somebody who might be a little bit difficult, or maybe someone who has an agenda or something. Like, yeah, you can learn a lot about watching how those people react. And there's a good way to react to those situations. And those situations are quite like they're highly variable. Like there can be some like bad situations where you might want to react in like a very positive way, and there might be some bad uh, situations where you want to like be very. I just had some deja vu. Holy shit! There might be some like there might be some like situations which seem very similar, but you might want to have like a completely different reaction, or a completely different, like you might want to have a much more strong reaction. You don't really want to have a negative reaction like ever, or you don't really want to ever have like a seemingly uncontrolled reaction. But you might want to like, I don't know. And I guess there's really like for those situations, like I've always been looking for like the right way, or the correct answer for interacting in that way, or interacting in a specific situation. Um, and there's really like a lot of people have just like different styles of handling that stuff. There's just like generally you want to be prepared. You want to like expect the unexpected. Generally, you just want to like know what you would say to almost any question, or know which information you should reveal or not. And generally, you just want to like kind of like think about that stuff ahead of time. But there's really no right action, and like if you start like trying to like pursue things from like the perspective of like a strategy that has like memorized responses for like memorized conditions, there's no real correlation there. Like, and there's like some strategies that like a strategy that just has memorized reactions for memorized situations is like terrible, because it's not really thinking about anything beyond the first like step, or it's not really thinking about anything beyond the next reaction. Instead, like a more like stylistic strategy for like communicating, or like for PR interactions, where you have like I'm trying to figure out what I was going to say. Like it's like a more stylistic strategy where like you have like a range of general reactions that you take. Uh, you know, then like you want your statements and you want your statements to like reflect some like coherent style or coherent strategy of like interacting with people. You don't want to just like, because a lot of like I would always try and like figure out like, I guess I had a lot of problems like interacting socially, and so like a lot of people would tell me like, oh well, if this happens, just say this exact thing, and I wouldn't really like understand like the correlation between like why you might say that thing, and so I would like just go around and like mimic that behavior just based on advice that I wasn't really sure whether or not I should take, and a lot of times it was like a handful of times it was like intentionally bad advice, like where someone tried to like skew my social model so that I would like interact poorly with other people, um, which is really fucked up. But I would go and like mimic the behavior that was suggested to me, and I wouldn't get the response. I wouldn't understand why I got certain responses. And I guess if I had another problem is like I just didn't interact enough, and I didn't really try to talk to people enough. So I didn't develop my own understanding of how people interacted and why they interacted the way they did. I just took it for granted that whatever advice they gave me was true, which generally limited me into not interacting with people at all. But my point is that I like just kind of mimicked what they suggested me to do, and I didn't ever connect the dots between like their advice and like the situations that they were like the situations under which their advice would apply. I didn't connect the dots to like how that person reacted, and I didn't try to even like increase the amount of information in my like closure of the social environment that I was in. And by closure of the social environment, I mean like I didn't. If I had just gone out and interacted with on my own, and I wasn't really afraid to mess up, like yeah, I would make a lot of mistakes, but then I would also begin to like take into account and take into mind like situations or similarities between various social simulations. I would take into account various like uh, conditions that were similar between different social situations, and I would have like kind of expanded the amount of information that I was taking into account for like a social situation or whatever, and then I would kind of be able to like make my own judgments as to like how to like interact with someone. I would develop my own personality and my own style of like working with people, and I think like a lot of people like, I mean that's how I was when I was. I just wanted to know like what to say to other people to like kind of interact with them. Uh, because I thought there was like some kind of like magical like combination of like phrases, and I could or like phrases and or actions, and then if I did that magical combination of phrases or actions, I could just like basically go to the club and like you know I didn't even finish that. My point is though like people have different like strategies for interacting socially, and so if you start taking advice from like other people, then you don't really understand the context under which that advice should be applied, or if you don't really take it, or if your social model or whatever doesn't really allow you to like understand or like recognize the conditions under which that advice should be applied, then you're not really going to be interacting with people in a coherent manner, and it's just going to be it's sometimes it might not come off too bad, but sometimes it might actually end up triggering some situations that are like really bad. And usually that would happen if you don't really have a very good social model. And also, there's like some strategies for like interacting with other people socially, like that. They're like limited to a certain set of reactions, which like when you like execute that style or that strategy of social interaction, it it makes sense as long as you stay within that range of reactions or whatever. But as soon as you start like applying, arbitrary rules for social interaction or for responses to an interviewer or whatever that like stray outside of that style or that strategy, then the coherence of your strategy and the coherence of the execution of that strategy starts to break down, and like whereas like sometimes the actions within that strategy or the reactions within that strategy would be just uh, perceived as nonsensical or even negative sometimes. Um, as long as you stay within that and you execute that style of communication, those those set of like reactions will retain their coherence and their validity. Whereas like I'm trying to figure out how to explain like the concepts that I'm explaining, but my point is like there's several different like communication styles, and if you stick to one communication style that is like coherent with its reactions are coherent with its reactions, then you might be fine. But if you try to if you try to imitate a communication style that you don't really understand, and then you just like mix and mesh with other reactions from other communication styles, then like the reactions typical to that communication style could be perceived as negative. So you really got to figure out like why a set of reactions would really pertain to a particular communication style, and like how to like I don't know, it's complicated. It's like sometimes it's like easy to like understand that stuff, and the human mind is like good at like understanding that stuff, even though like it doesn't intellectualize it, or like the subconscious mind is good at like working within those frameworks without really understanding it. But if you do understand those frameworks, and particularly if you can understand not only the communication framework that you use or the behavioral framework that you use, but also the behavioral frameworks that others use, and you're capable of like constructing a behavioral framework for some other person, then you're going to be much more capable of interacting with other people and much more successful in doing so. Anyway, so I really do like to watch interviews of other people, and when I watch anything, even if it's TV, I like to really pay attention. Sometimes I'll rewind, or like just to kind of see how they reacted to different things. And there's really like a sea of information that you can glean from those videos, and I don't know. It's interesting to see how like those people of various stature, including some people, some CEOs or whatever, or artists or whatever that might be almost unknown. It's interesting to see how they react with like audience members or like other people who might truly just be completely unknown. And I like observing how they kind of like interact with those people. And so. And you'll kind of notice that these people just seem to be like smart and quick, and they usually always have the right answer. And usually after someone has been like in that position for like a year or two, they've just been surrounded by like really smart, really successful people, and they kind of like tend to draw on the experience of other people. That's why it's really frustrating when people tell me I'm not coachable, or I guess nobody's really told me that, but I think I've heard a couple of people insinuate that, but that's not. It's not really true that I'm not really. It's definitely not true. I mean, it's just kind of frustrating that like I'm able to like pick up a lot of this stuff on my own, and there's a lot of like advice that I need, and I need a lot of practice, and I can't really get into practice for communication and administrative skills in business if I'm like always like if I always have my head down like programming. I just can't get in like the practice on the other skills. And so I like watching how these people react to like leading questions and stuff like that. And usually you'll see that those people just don't attach to it, and they'll like maybe like that like you got to realize when you're in that position and you have influence. Usually, like if somebody asks you a leading question that's gonna like lead into something really negative, or if somebody wants to like, or somebody's like employing like rhetorical strategies towards like a negative end, they're trying to like pigeonhole you into like talking about a subject or into making a certain statement or into like or they're trying to like rouse you like emotionally. Usually like if you're the person who is influential, like you have the you're the ball is in your court, like you've got the power to like decide where that conversation goes. Unless they, but then again, you don't want to seem like weak by not like assessing some kind of like some kind of like topic that may be controversial or something like that. But you also don't want to like shoot yourself in the foot. But observing how like somebody like responds to those kinds of problems is vital to kind of measuring their character. And another good point is like is that like it's great to not have those kinds of like negative things for people to point out or ask questions about. Like so, if you didn't have sex with that hooker, like they probably wouldn't be asking about it. So, it's like probably good to not do things like that, so that like so you don't have to worry about it. And so if you know about like the long-term goals and mission of that person's organization, you can look at like how they posture themselves, and you can look at how their organization speaks volumes about their goals, and how do they say what they say, and what are their motivations behind the structure of their message. How are current events and market conditions affecting their message today as compared to the past, and like what are the obvious points that they could be making, and why. And why aren't they mentioning those things? And like you can also watch for like people to like announce things as though they're like completely novel, but they aren't, or like you knew that because of like their strategy or reactions in one particular sector that there must be a that their business strategy or whatever would indicate that they're doing this new project X over here. And it might just be strange that they never mentioned that until like that certain point in time or something. I don't know. I'm kind of like going off the radar here, but how do they? The next question is perfect. How do they stay on message or circle back from a risky area? And just kind of like seeing like how people interact and like how they really gotta like look at their emotional responses and like understand their kind of like rhetorical strategy um, to like understand like because like once you do that you can like understand like okay like I know their business is doing this and this, they're making these announcements, but it's like that person didn't really want to talk about that thing. It's like they went kind of close to it, and then like they gave me like a kind of like I saw like a tell like in their facial expression, and they kind of like backed away from it. Like, why is that? Like, why did they not want to talk about that thing, or why did they not, And you can kind of get a lot of information from that. You can also like a lot of the information that you would glean from that is really like not grounded in anything concrete. And so it might just be a waste of time to even think about it. But and so does it seem like the interviewer that person like veered off track, and why? They just like ADD. Sometimes like being a little bit like nonsensical, or ADD or whatever can like help because you're not like so singularly focused that it's easy to judge your reactions and interactions to construct an idea of what they think your strategy might be. And so, what was the outcome of seemingly off-the-cuff statements and questions? Was it good or was it bad? Was it, did they feel like they conveyed the message that they wanted to? Like, did they convey that message confidently? Like, if they're working on a new project, like, did they, does it seem like they're confident in this project? Like, does it seem like they're really confident in the project in spite of the fact that it doesn't look like it's actually going to work out? Why? Like, I guess maybe a good example of that is like HP's like the machine, which I thought was really cool because they're developing they are developing all this like patented IP for like optical interconnections for computing and for big data. And optical interconnection for computing basically means that a CPU can have unlimited access to memory. And that basically means that like the optimal design for large computing infrastructures then gets changed, or then becomes, or the optimal design for big data changes like fundamentally, so that you can just have as many processors as you want, and you have something that like so you got as many processors as you want. You got like something in the middle that kind of like coordinates access to memory and processing, and then you have like this large set of like maybe terabytes of RAM that like all those processors can instantaneously access. You got to ensure that they don't write over the wrong things and stuff like that. But like my point is like instead of having like just like huge arrays of like computers that are all like isolated and have their own like set of like 16 gigs of RAM or whatever, like it totally radicalizes like the optimal design for computing infrastructure. And I was like really excited about this, and that's like one design, you know, that's like one design capability that like I was really excited about. And they also the machine or whatever HP's machine had like 2 or 3 other like important like IP developments that they were working on. And I was like, mentioning that we should, that people should invest in this. I was like recommending to friends and family that they should invest in PHP based on that information, based on, the exclusivity of the intellectual property, and based on I thought it would be a good long-term bet, and I still think it might be but I saw an announcement. I haven't really stayed way too in tune with their announcements with those products, but I saw another product or I saw another or announcement where it said they kind of like scrapped the machine project. So I don't know what that means. Obviously, they did develop some like intellectual property with that massive project. But that project was like a huge uh, that project was a fairly large factor that influenced their decision, their CEO's decision to restructure the company into two different companies, like into one like server company and one like personal computing company. As far as I know, that's how they restructured. I think, I don't know, I'm kind of like making that assumption that it was just based on the fact that that might be a strategically good decision. My point is they made like a significant amount of they undertook like a significant cost in like promoting that and restructuring their entire organization, at least partially to, or which was like they restructured their organization, which was like, and they partially rationalized doing so because of this project. And so I'm like wondering, like, okay, like all that stuff that you were developing, like, and all those like massive like costs to restructure that stuff, like, where did like, why did you guys stop working on it? You know, like, and it's really like, and I've also noticed that like, so like you got this large like corporation or something, maybe you employ like 40,000 people or something, or maybe you employ like 10,000 or even 5,000 people. And so your organization coordinates with like all these people, and you've got these like tree-like hierarchies of like employees in various departments and stuff. And then you kind of get to the higher echelons of the company, like maybe the top 1% of that company. Maybe I should say top like 2%, just to avoid the you know connotation of 1%. But anyway, so like you've got this like high level management stuff. Usually it's like the C-level employees and the employees like directly below them, and basically like the structure and function of the organization looks like, and the strategy of that organization looks completely different to those people at the top than it does like looking at the top from the bottom up. So like the customers of that corporation and most of the employees of that corporation may perceive the strategy. And here's another good point: is that the strategy of that company it's got to make sense both for the employees at the top and the employees at the bottom. But the middle management and the lower the everyday employees of that company, as well as the customers, might perceive the actions of that company as such to uh, you know they might perceive the actions to be part of like some strategy for some objective or something like that. And then, but yet, like the actions that that company is undertaking is really for some like completely separate agenda, like entirely. And so I think I'm gonna like take some notes on this actually, because I don't quite have the strategy section completely taken care of yet. So I'm going to talk about HP's machine and how things look different from the top than they do from the bottom up. And basically what I mean is like from the top, they may like, they're going to be, and this really does have more to do with strategy than it does communication, but they're simultaneously pursuing two different actions. They're two different strategies. One is a publicized strategy. It's like a very public strategy. And then another is a more private strategy that's not really made public, because doing so would maybe cripple them, like as far as their, it might be disadvantageous for their competitiveness in the market. Anyway, so like they've got to like figure out how to like destructure both these strategies into actions that are like coherent, so that like the private strategy would make sense with the public strategy, so they can like destructure like the actions in the private strategy and like execute them as part of like a publicized strategy that makes sense to the stockholders and to the customers and to the to the employees in that organization. I mean, that's a big one. Like, if you're working with an organization of like 10,000 or 100,000 employees, and you're trying to like pursue some strategy that, like, if properly executed, would like give you a large market share in a new in a developing market that most people don't know about or whatever, then you might not want to like have all of the employees know exactly what you're doing, because they might like blab about what they're doing, or kind of like lose you might lose some of the advantage there. But so you've got this like public facing strategy, and my point is, like, everything looks different from the top down than it does like from the bottom up, because from the top down, like, they're trying to like deal with all possible situations. Like, there might be some situation where like they might want to like they're going to want to be like they're going to want to be thinking they're going to want to like keep close track of like their inventory and assets and offices and real estates, and like especially for large corporations, they're going to like maintain like an accurate or inaccurate or conveniently inaccurate like tally of their assets, so that they can like a lot of the stuff is like, if you know about this stuff and you do it in the wrong way, or if you do it in a way that it is perceived in such a way that you did things unethically, you could get in a lot of trouble for like stock price manipulation, and like because a lot of these like techniques that I'm talking about, like, I mean, if you undertook certain actions to basically like cause the price of your stock to drop, so that you could like repurchase it and then make a bunch of money when the stock price rose or whatever, or you like influence the actions of an organization just to like profit, then you can get in a lot of trouble with that, because it's like really unethical. But it's a lot of those actions are actually just like like required for everyday like everyday like executive like decisions, and like the executives have to like keep a close eye on like what the projections are for like certain industries or markets or like revenue streams, and like ensure that like the employees that they hire are effectively utilized. And they might have to like just kind of like discuss within like a group of like 2 or 3 dozen people, like the possibility of like selling an entire like arm of their organization, or like bundling up like a block of IP, like patents and stuff like that, and selling that off, or laying off like 1,000 employees. And they may not actually have any intention of doing that, but they have to be able to explore these kinds of strategies, and they have to like shield that from the public, from the public eye. And so they might actually be like thinking about well, they actually have to always think about like the value of their assets, and the cost of potential liabilities and like risk and stuff like that. And a lot of these subjects are like not good. And if someone in like middle management thinks that like for whatever reason their whole department might get axed, then like you can have people start playing like politics that are kind of dirty or undesirable, or it could influence like the execution of your organization's mission. And then you could like screw a lot of things up. I should really be like listening to myself. So the execs need to estimate assets, liabilities. Also need to be able to evaluates the effects of hypothetical situations without worrying about the See, I mean, I should really be like a CEO. I mean, why not? I'd probably be pretty good at it. I'm just saying, you know, ain't nobody's told me any of this stuff. I just think really hard. I just like close my eyes and like scrunch my face up and just like, and then I'm like, aha, I got it. Maybe. Anyways. Oh shit. Yeah, war games are another really good example of this. Like, you don't like, I mean, if you're in control of a large military, and if you're coordinating with other militaries around the world, yeah, you might want to like work on might want to run through like war game exercises, and those exercises can be really expensive, and like you don't really want to tip off your enemies that you're like, you know, thinking about like whether or not this hypothetical like situation would occur, or like you don't want them to think that you're too worried about it, you know. But at the same time, like I think everyone, like most large countries in the world, just kind of like understand like, yeah, like I want to make sure that my military is like, you know, prepared for various like situations, and so it's not like running war games are really gonna like, you can't really like draw too many like conclusions from like running war, like from your enemies running war games. Like you might get some idea of what's going on, but you also might want to like let like, you know, if NATO is going to run war games or whatever, they might let Russia know like that they're going to be doing stuff in the Baltic Sea, and just like, don't worry about it, guys. We're not going to invade you. Like, um, and so you really can't make too many judgments about like people running through like war games, because really just every country wants to be as prepared as they can for a situation like that, and they want to know that they're as organized as possible. And my point is like, and so that, you know, these organizations might really, let's see, where was I? Oh yeah, they just kind of want to like be able to evaluate the effect of hypothetical situations, especially when those hypothetical strategies require complicated action, and when there's, oh, another really good example is the Newton. The Newton is like the perfect example of this. Require complicated action, and when so the Apple Newton is like a perfect example of this, because like, I mean, the Apple Newton kind of flopped. I don't really know how successful it was in like the early 80s or the late 80s or whatever. Mid 80s. I'm just gonna go with mid 80s. I don't really know how successful it was. I think it was like fairly successful, but like it didn't really pick on, probably because of like battery life and processing capability. But it was like basically like, it was almost like war games for Apple. Like basically what they were doing was like, Steve Jobs, and I think it actually was released after Steve Jobs left. Let me just check that out. Just because, See, when did it come out? Oh, it started developing in 1987 and shipped the first devices in 1993. And I guess, and I mean, it looks like Steve Jobs wasn't involved. It looks like Steve Jobs was not really that involved in the design process, but I can tell you that he was probably the one, like, he was probably one of the people involved in like the earliest discussions about a product like the Newton. Because everybody kind of knew computers were going to get smaller and smaller, and eventually somebody's going to ask the question, well, could you fit a computer in your pocket? And I can guarantee you that Steve Jobs would probably like to talk about a product like that in the early 80s. But my point is, like, Apple Newton was probably like a huge failure, but like Apple was able to like put like a mobile product out there like 20 years before the iPhone, or 25 years before the iPhone, I guess, and they were able to like gauge like the public's like enthusiasm and reaction for like mobile applications, and like they were able to like get a ton of research in, and probably collected a lot of like usage data on mobile applications that probably became critical for determining what would be required for a successful product. Anyways, while publicly it seemed like a huge failure, that like their organization probably got a lot of experience out of it. I can't really say that that would be worth it, but I mean they really did get like they really did get like a lot of experience because you would like be able to like determine like, okay, like this is where like this is the power consumption for like a processor in like 1990, and this is like these are like the application requirements or whatever, and these are like the user interfaces that are possible, and these are like the experiences that are possible with a mobile thing, but like with a mobile computing platform. But like, gee, we really wish that we had networking access everywhere, because like, wouldn't it be cool like if in addition to like reading your spreadsheets on your phone, or in addition to like receiving or reading messages on your phone, like wouldn't it be cool if like no matter where you were, like you were connected to the internet or whatever, or you were connected to some system, some network that allowed you to receive those messages? Like, wouldn't it be cool if there was like something that didn't require like old school like Ethernet cables to like, or didn't require like, basically they would be able to like ideate like the constraints that would be required for a product like that if it were to be successful, and they would be able to like Apple as an organization would be able to determine like, okay, we know this isn't going to work now, we're just going to give up on the Apple Newton, but we actually know that like when computer processors are fast, and when their power consumption is low or lower, when their batteries are when battery when battery capacity reaches some critical threshold, and when network capabilities and data transmission and bandwidth also reaches a critical threshold, then we know like that is the time to launch a product like that. That is when like that is the product that is going to enable um, certain like experiences that are profitable. So um, so let me finish talking about communication for a long time. And so, yeah, I mean, basically, it's just like critical to convey a simple message so that your customers can your customers and your organization can easily understand that. However, like in the context of strategy, like a simple message might be disadvantageous, and that's because elements of your business strategy, you don't want them to be so predictable. So if you only stick to, if you only stick to the talking points that you need to mention, then people are only going to focus on those things, and they have a much smaller set of pieces to try and construct a picture of what you're going to construct an idea of your competitive strategy. And so for a lot of organizations, that's like it makes your organization's actions you know much easier to understand, and in a strategic context, that's a disadvantage. But that is what I'm trying to say. And in contrast, your organization needs to keep people guessing. And the idea here is really at least twofold. First, people are excited with new information, and this keeps your fans and customers focused on you. And you're just kind of like throwing out like non sequitur kind of stuff that maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't, but it sounds exciting. And maybe it gets you a little bit of attention. PR is like free advertisement. The only bad news is no news. And I guess that's not really true, but whatever. And then secondly, extraneous information makes it much harder for a competitor to completely discern elements of your strategy. And so if you only stick to what seems relevant, then it becomes easier for your opponents to predict your intentions, strategies, opportunities, and other facets of your organization's behavior. And so these tactics contrast with the goal of keeping communications simple and minimal. At best, these tactics allow your organization to remain agile and retain surprise, yet the wrong idea could backfire if not properly assessed or executed. Using tactics to avoid predictability requires that you have an intimate understanding of how your message is perceived by various categories of consumers and how it could be perceived. And so I'm gonna take a break real quick and then come back with signaling.